All right, let's go ahead and get this episode of Tech Thursday started here. This is going to be one of the shorter ones since really nothing changed compared to last week. We're going to talk about some of the gaming industry news because I think probably the biggest thing for the PC enthusiast community is the big shakeup that happened this week with Microsoft, Xbox, Game Studios. So that's probably what we're going to talk a little bit about in terms of what that actually means for the hardware industry, because that does require, or that does have ripple effects in the sense that it could cause some sort of change in the hardware lineup, at least timelines and things like that, because the company's strategy for the gaming division could change, and Microsoft being so large could have some effect on hardware platforms, in particular the PC industry and the PC platform. So we'll talk about that, and then we're going to talk about Resident Evil Requiem. The game, today is launch day. The reviews for the game went live yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. It was either yesterday or Tuesday. I'm pretty sure it was yesterday. And so far, it's looking really good. We're going to be actually live streaming gameplay of Resident Evil Requiem tomorrow evening. So for those of you who tune in to the gaming weekend live streams that I do pretty frequently, pretty regularly, I would say at this point, it's either a Friday evening or a Saturday evening, but definitely hit the bell icon and get subscribed to the channel if you want to be sure not to miss out on those live streams if you're interested in that. Otherwise, with that being said, the only other thing I want to talk about is RDNA 5. There was an article regarding RDNA 5. It was supposed to... Okay, let's clarify one thing. If it wasn't for the AI market right now being what it is, we would be on track to receive RDNA 5 graphics cards this fall. So basically, December of this year, in a normal market, so ignoring AI, ignoring the memory issues, the supply chain problems, ignore all that. In a normal environment, we would be on track to get RDNA 5 graphics cards, new flagship graphics cards at the super ultra enthusiast high end, the end of this year. Now, whether or not that is still true, that remains to be seen, and that's kind of what this article talks about. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way first, because that is probably the biggest news article as far as looking at computer hardware articles of this week. The only one that stood out to me was this one from WCCF Tech talking about AMD's top RDNA 5, in quotes, AT0, whatever that means, GPU might release for gamers, but in limited quantities. So this is a rumor right now, but keep in mind, like I just said, in a normal environment, without AI craziness, without DRAM shortages, this would not be a rumor, this would be a normal thing. So because of the industry at large, the way it is right now, this is now a rumor instead of a real possibility. But this is the only thing out of all the articles that I looked at for things to talk about on this episode of Tech Thursdays, this is the only thing that stood out to me. Everything else was kind of like noise at the end of the day. So let's take a look here. AMD might make a Radeon gaming graphics card with its top RDNA AT0, but will be a limited release. So it says here, AMD's RDNA 5 GPUs are slated for a 2027 release. Okay. That is normally true for things like mid-range and entry-level and the whole refresh lineup. That is true, and that is still normal. So I don't consider this anything extraordinary. And while there have been rumors surrounding the various configurations, it's evident that the information isn't available, or the information that is available isn't conclusive to tell whether, yeah, well, okay. That's because they don't know the full roadmap. And we do not know if the roadmap has been impacted by any of this stuff. Now, I am of the opinion that memory shortages should not impact a roadmap. Meaning, if a company was planning to release a product, doesn't matter what it is, if they're planning to release a product, they should not have any reason to delay that or move the product forward or backward in time just because of some kind of external factor. The only exceptions would be extreme acts of nature, like a giant earthquake or a tsunami or something that basically wipes out manufacturing capability on a grand scale. Things like that. If it's not for those sort of things, there really is no reason to delay anything. Because if they delay things, it kind of messes up. It causes ripple effects that don't look good to shareholders, that don't do anything good for the industry, in the sense that if you delay a product, for example, by even 6 months, you create a void in your product lineup where now you either are not fulfilling the demand at all, or you're having to extend the lifespan of your older previous generation, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also not a good thing either from a technology standpoint and from a company valuation standpoint. So there's a lot of things that go into this behind the scenes that I think the average gamer or PC enthusiast don't really think about when it comes to how to run a business successfully. So that's kind of where I stand on some of these things when they talk about why these things should be pushed to next year, or were they ever planned to release this year. I think for the AMD graphics cards, the RDNA 5, we'll call it RDNA 5. I don't know what the official name is, but we're just going to run with RDNA 5. The true successor to the 7900 XTX, because keep in mind, currently there is no successor to the 7900 XTX. A graphics card that launched at the end of 2022, which means that graphics card is a middle-aged graphics card at this point in time. It is not new. It is not young. It is an old graphics card, and it is currently AMD's flagship graphics card. So they have no successor to that card up until today. And this rumored graphics card is the true successor to the 7900 XTX. So this graphics card, this AT0 graphics card, it's the true flagship GPU from AMD. And it already exists. I mean, think about how long they normally do hardware updates. Every graphics card generation is typically 2 years, plus or minus 3 months on average. You can go back in history and look at every single GPU launch for the last 10 years, and you will see that what I just said is actually true. So you don't need a bunch of leaks and rumors and all these type of things to determine when a new graphics card is supposed to launch. All you got to do is look at the last decade and look at the release date for things like Vega 64, Radeon 7, 6900 XT, 7900 XTX. You can do the exact same thing with NVIDIA, RTX 2080 Ti, RTX 3090 Ti. You look at all these different GPUs when they launched, or specifically look at the generation. When did the generation replace the previous generation? So when did the 20 series launch? When did the 30 series launch? When did the 40 series launch? You will find there is a definite pattern. There is a definite pattern because publicly traded companies have certain expectations that they have to meet for the shareholders to approve of their business practices and their operations. Now, a lot of gamers don't think about that, but that's how the real world works. So these GPUs, technically in a normal market, technically these RDNA 5 GPUs are super late. They're super late because if we're talking realistic timeframes, this RDNA 5 AT0 thing was supposed to, well, ignoring RDNA 5 for a second, the successor to the 7900 XTX, and maybe this is where we need to jump into Paint because Paint will illustrate this a lot better for those of you that are probably struggling to understand what I'm talking about here. But if you look, let's do the 6900 XT. 6900 XT. Or let's just do RDNA 2. RDNA 2 was launched in Q4 2020. 2020. This is the RDNA 2 launch. Okay? RDNA 3. Q4 2022. Remember what I said? 24 months. That's 2 years. Every 2 years. Plus or minus 1 quarter or 3 months. So now, RDNA 4. Never happened. The flagship RDNA 4, meaning the big successor to the 7900 XTX, never actually launched. But if it was to have launched, it would have been Q4 of 2024 if it was on target. If it was on target. That means RDNA 5, Q4 2026. Well, now that's quite interesting, is it? If we go by these 24-month law, every 2 years, there's a new generation. There's a new generation. Let's look at some other ones. Ampere. When was this? Q3 2020. Well, it was Q3, Q4. It was like the super... You know what? I'm going to say it's Q4 because it was so much the very end of Q3. It was literally like the end of September, if I'm not mistaken, was the RTX 3080. The RTX 3090 was in Q4 of 2020. So I'm just going to say Q4 2020. So then what did we get? Ada. RTX 40 series. When was that? Q4 2022. Okay. Blackwell. When was that supposed to be? When was that supposed to be? Q4 2024. Now we know that actually didn't happen. Well, what did I always say? 24 months plus or minus 1 quarter or 3 months. So what did they actually do? They delayed by 1 quarter. They delayed by 1 quarter because they had excess ADA that they wanted to get rid of. So they forced gamers who couldn't wait to buy last gen, essentially. That's what NVIDIA did. They kind of screwed over their customer base, at least to a degree. They let all their 4090s vanish way, way, way in advance by pulling it till Q1 of last year. So Blackwell was Q1 2025 because of that. But technically, it's supposed to have been Q4 of 2024. So that means the Rubin, is that what it's called? Vera Rubin or whatever? Rubin or whatever the new one is supposed to be. What is it called? Somebody tell me the name of it. I think it's Rubin. Rubin is going to be Q2 of 2027. So we're just going to leave that there. NVIDIA's going to slow roll it again, just like they did with Blackwell. They're going to do 24 months plus another 3 months. So expect May, June of next year. So anyway, that's the RTX 60 series. So there you go. Those looking for RTX 60 series, that's how long you have to wait at the earliest. For the least amount of time. That's how long you're going to be waiting. Okay, so but AMD should, because this never happened. Because this never happened, it never went to market. When I say the true flagship, I'm talking about the true flagship. I'm not talking about 9070 XT because I know someone's probably like, well, what about 9070 XT? 9070 XT is a mid-range graphics card. FYI. It's not a flagship graphics card. So 9070 XT is more of the successor. Before anybody gets even further confused, the RX 7800 XT's successor is the RX 9070 XT. These are roughly the successor GPU right there. So that is the reason why I don't talk about the 9070 XT in this context, because it is irrelevant. What we're talking about is when they bring in the flagship. The flagship cards are what we're focusing on. So the flagship card for AMD, because if we're still hanging on to this 24-month time period, and AMD literally missed an entire generation of flagship GPUs, now what that means is they have had, you know, literally they'll have had double the amount of time to develop a successor to the 7900 XTX. So you would think that, at least from my point of view, the performance level, the performance uplift from the 7900 XTX to AMD's new true successor, the RDNA 5 flagship, should be around 100% faster. At least. At very least 90% faster, if not more than 100% faster. That is kind of the expectation that I have, considering they have had twice the amount of time to develop a successor, a true successor. So you can look at we can extrapolate the data to further infer when these flagships should actually, or what these flagship percentage uplifts should be. So if we pull up RX 6900, actually, let's do RX Vega 64. So if we do Vega 64 for a second, so AMD has regularly, not regularly, but AMD has done this in the past, where they have failed to launch a successor generation, like in every 2-year blocks. So the last time this happened was with Vega. So they did Vega 64. This was 2017. And then you look at the 6900 XT, wherever that is. Let me find that. Where is that GPU? So this one, 131% faster than the Vega 64. Now, if we try to give AMD the benefit of the doubt and try to go with Radeon 7, Radeon 7, it was technically another product that was never supposed to actually exist. But if we use that one, then 95% faster to the 6900 XT was 94% faster than, you could say 95. It's about 100% faster than the Radeon 7. That's what happens when they skip a generation. Because basically RDNA 1 never had an actual successor to Radeon 7. So basically AMD is expected to launch something similar to 6900 XT again. So in terms of that,
given the lengthened cycle, I think buying the second GPU 2 weeks ago was a good move.
the lengthened cycle, you think buying second? Yeah, well, you needed something for that HPC setup, or that living room PC setup. So, yeah. And like Fake Frames is pointing out, historical outlets no longer apply. Yeah, but you're again, yeah, sort of, but yeah, that's a weird comparison because you're talking about the second, you're talking about a smaller die, like next gen smaller die versus last gen big die. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm focusing on big die, next gen big die versus last gen big die. That's what I'm focusing on. So I'm not looking at that. That is kind of a corner case that you're mentioning with 5080 and all that stuff. So, but Radeon 7, you look at this. This was AMD's like fastest GCN graphics card that they ever released in small quantities, and if you look at the 6900 XT, I'm not even looking at 6950 XT. 6950 XT is like 100% faster, but 6900 XT is about 94, 95, you can say 95% faster than the Radeon 7. And if we look at the 6900 XT, the 6900 XT going to the 7900 XTX, the 7900 XTX says here 47%. So you can say that it's either 45 to 50% on average. That's the range. So we'll call that 50% faster than the 6900 XTX. So that is a generation to generational uplift. So if you say that the target window is 50% uplift every 2 years historically, that means that we should be looking at a 100% uplift with the RDNA 5, because that's kind of the thing that I'm expecting. This thing needs to be in that ballpark, because you look at, let's look at XTX right now. XTX, so there is no AMD GPU that is a successor to this GPU. So I would expect the RDNA 5, the AT0, as this rumored article is talking about, I would expect this, the successor to this, to be about 95 to 100% faster than this GPU. That would make sense. That is not an... I would consider that a valid expectation to have, considering how much time has passed. By the time this GPU launches, assuming this GPU launches at the end of this year, that will have been 4 years. 4 years. That is twice the amount of time. So if we take this to be a 50% uplift, this would be a 100% uplift versus the 7900 XTX. This is a normal expectation to have based off of how much time has gone by and how much time the engineers have had. They've literally had twice the amount of time to develop a successor GPU, because regardless of whether they actually made one of these or not, this never actually happened. So this 50% thing never actually happened, because they never released, regardless of whether they actually made one internally and they never released it to market, or it was canceled, or they skipped over it for whatever reason, and they went back to the drawing board, or they just skipped it, or they had never planned to make it. You know, this is kind of the expectation that I have. So let's look at the kind of the numbers here in this article, because this article gets some interesting numbers. So I don't know where these numbers are coming from, but it says here that the potential RDNA 5 GPU, the flagship, would be maximum of 96 compute units, which equates to 12,288 cores on a 512 or 384-bit bus. That makes sense to me. And then the amount of VRAM would either be anywhere from 24 gigabytes of VRAM to 32 gigabytes of VRAM. Out of all of these, okay, actually, yeah, that would be the flagship. So then I don't know where to get that number from, though. And then the mid-tier, 40 compute units, that's 5,120 cores on anywhere from a 384. I don't think that would be 384. I think that would be like 256. 256 or down to 192, apparently. And then that would have anywhere from 12 to 24 gigabytes of VRAM. And then the low tier, 24 compute units, 3,072. I don't know how they're defining this. So what does that mean? Like how many? Hold on. So this is a proportion. So if I do 40 over 5120 is how many compute units to 1. So if I want to know the number of compute units, x over 1, Or how many... Well, I don't know how many... Or, okay, one compute unit times... Okay, so 5120 divided by 40. So 128 cores. Is that the same for all of these? Yeah, 128 cores. 128 cores per compute unit. 120, like, how did they come up? Is that like a thing? Is that like a confirmed thing? Like, where are they getting these numbers from? In terms of 128 GPU shader cores is one compute unit. "96 compute units." Well, the easiest way to find out what this is, all you gotta do is go look at MI, what is it? MI 450X or whatever? Because it's already there. You just gotta go look at AMD's AI GPU. And you can abstract this info from that, probably. I would guess. I would wager a guess that's probably one way to do it. To figure out the power, at least the CU to core ratio count that they're doing. So that's okay. Well, this is probably the most interesting article that I have seen all week because, man, computer hardware, I'm not gonna lie, this year is not a good year for computer enthusiasts or hardware enthusiasts. It is not a good year. SSD pricing is through the roof. Hard drives, if you need actual NAS-based hard drives, are starting to become harder to find for a decent price, unless you're buying like on server parts or something. And even then, it's slim pickings. And then you have, of course, the DDR5 prices are creating a big problem for people who want to upgrade. And, you know, it's just all bad news for the whole year, pretty much. So anyway, this sounds interesting to me because looking at AMD's current flagship GPU, the 7900 XTX has 6,144 cores on a 384-bit bus. So if this is true, and they could build something with 12,200, so let me do some math here, 12,288, that is literally double. Yeah, that's 2x the number of cores in the 7900 XTX. So yeah, they should be able to get 95% scaling to 100% performance uplift by going to this sort of thing. Especially, plus it's the new architecture, so there'll be some other efficiency gains and other things too that it does better compared to the previous, last generation at this point. So since this is RDNA 5 and we're like literally the bar, let's be honest here, the bar for AMD's next generation GPU is set so low because they completely skipped a generation. The bar is so low. Like all they got to do is do 2x 700 XTX. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to ask. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, 4 years. 4 years, guys. It'll have been 4 years. If this thing launches in December of this year, it'll literally, the 7900 XTX will be 4 years old when this thing launches in December. If this thing launches in December. So should be way, way faster. With that many cores, with a new front end, yeah, this thing should be really fast. It should be really fast. But, again, things to keep in mind, the priority of the gaming landscape has changed. It seems like performance uplift is not the thing that you look forward to anymore. Now people seem to desire upscaling and frame generation. I mean, that seems to be the case these days. So maybe some of the feature set here will focus on upscaling technology, dedicating silicon to upscaling and frame gen techniques and things like that. So maybe they'll do something like that. What price do you think this will go? This will be starting around $1,500 to $1,600, I would think. So my expectation for this GPU, let's go back to Paint here. So if we look historically, what was the price of this one? $999. $999. What was the price of this one? $999. What was the price of this one? Nothing. It didn't exist. So what will the price of this one be? I'm thinking starting will be around $14.99 at the low. This will be on the low side. Realistically, I can see it going for like $15.99 MSRP. But I think it'll be probably starting around $14.99. Somewhere around there. So let's think about that for a second. That's first of all, this will be 32. It'll be 1,228 SMs, which is 96 compute units with 32 gigabytes of VRAM. So yeah, this would be starting around 1,500. That to me seems normal. Yeah, I would buy it at that price. I would pay $1,500 for this GPU, like, immediately. Like, yeah. If it's $2,000, I think they would only do $2,000 if we're in some kind of really messed up market, which we technically kind of are right now because of VRAM. But I think MSRP would be $14.99. I mean, you guys can see just by looking at these specs, like, this is no joke. This is 2x the number of cores of a 700 XTX. So this thing would be, in theory, 95, 100% faster than that. That automatically means that this thing's faster than the 5090. This is, like, faster than a 5090. Like, 100% guaranteed this is faster than a 5090. Okay? So, and a 5090 costs more than $1,500. So to me, I think this is a good deal. At $1,500, this is a good deal. At $2,000, this is a competitive deal. And if it's at $2,500, then I think it's too much.
I just turn on 3x frame gen on MH Wilds at native 4K these days to lock it above 144 FPS, which is the highest refresh rate on my TV. I don't notice any ghosting or flickering unless I really look for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been using FrameGen on Monster Hunter Wilds since day one, and I've never actually turned it off. So, when you say flickering or ghosting, was that ever a problem, though? In Wilds? I never remember that being a problem. I remember that being a problem in the open beta test before the game actually released. But ever since the game released, which is almost a year ago now, literally in 2 days, Monster Hunter Wilds will be 1 year old already. I never saw any ghosting. I've never had any flickering or ghosting. I don't know. I've never had any kind of visual problems with that game. I did see the ghosting in the open beta test, though. That was a known issue. But that was like a long time ago. That was, what, November 2024 when we did the live stream for the beta test? And we also did one in February last year, right before launch. But I've never had... Yeah. I mean, you're bringing up the ghosting, flickering. Did you ever have those things? Or is that something that people have mentioned when using multi-frame gen? Okay, so this is really the only main GPU that we could see this year that is a really big enthusiastic type GPU. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I think it would be like 1,500, but then, you know, the realistic price would be more like 1,700, 1,800, somewhere around there. Just very occasionally in an HDR only. Oh, well. So if you turn HDR off, you never see any of that? Because I've never noticed that at all. I have video footage of the weird ghosting problem from the beta test when we did the live stream for the beta test over a year ago, but I've never seen ghosting or any sort of visual issues with the actual game post launch. But I think in terms of GPU hardware releases, this is basically it. Like, this is the one, this is like the only GPU that could show up this year. Nothing else. Nothing else. There's nothing else. There is going to be a professional GPU from Intel, which is going to be relatively, because it's a professional GPU, it'll be double the price of the normal Intel Arc GPUs. So that is, I guess that's something worth talking about. That's like a 24 gigabyte GPU, if not mistaken. But it's one of those weird ones where it's professional only and it's double die. Like, there's actual 2 dies. It's kind of like the old 7990 or the Radeon Pro Duo from back in the day. So that's, I don't think we're going to cover that because it's not really meant for gaming. It's meant for AI. And that is the one Intel GPU, though. That is already, I think it's already out, but it's only in OEM availability right now. Like, you can't actually buy one from Newegg or Micro Center. But yeah, there is an Intel 24 gigabyte GPU, but it is professional only, and it is one of those really weird double GPUs, so it's not meant for gaming, because if you try to run a game with it, you're only going to run one of the dies. So for those wondering about the Intel GPU, Intel has a GPU coming out soon, real soon, that this is the PCB. So here is the little, here's like the slot at the back. So, you know, you have your display port, your display port, your display port, and your display port. There's no HDMI on this GPU. It's all DisplayPort only. And then on the actual PCB, there is one die, and then there's another die. There's literally 2 of them, 2 GPUs physically on the PCB. Then you have your memory chips that kind of like encircle each of them. Kind of like this. You know? So you have RAM chips or VRAM chips around both of them. I know this is, I'm too lazy to draw this to scale, but you guys get the idea. You have your VRAM around both. They're identical dies. You have your VRMs, kind of like the VRM would be like here and here or whatever. Maybe it's like an L or something. Maybe the VRAM, maybe the DRAM goes around the middle and then the VRM is like in an L shape or something. So this is the Intel GPU. This is called the, if I remember correctly, it is the Intel Arc Pro B. It's not the B60. It's the other one. It's the B70, I believe. The Intel Arc Pro, let me make sure I have the correct info. No, because the B60 is already out. I almost bought a B60, by the way. I didn't buy it. The Intel B60 is already available at Micro Center, by the way. If you guys want a B60, you can already go get one. If you live near a Micro Center has them. I almost bought one last week, but I decided not to. So, Intel Arc Pro B70, right? Wait, RB. Oh, wait, is it the B60? No, it's not the B60. The B60 is not the double. It's something else. Intel Arc Pro B70. Yeah, it's the B70. B70? Oh, is it 32 gigabytes? Oh, it's 32 gigabytes, not 24 gigabytes. 24 gigabytes is the B60, which is already available at Micro Center. Yeah, B60 is already out. B70 is 32. This is 32 gigabytes of VRAM. B60 12 gigabytes is dumb. B60 12 gigabytes is literally just the B850 or B580. B580 is the B60 with 12 gigs of VRAM. For those that don't know what Intel GPUs are right now, the Arc B580 equals Arc Pro B60. The difference is this one is 12, this one is double. I almost bought this last week at Micro Center because Micro Center has them now. But then I thought, well, I'm not super impressed. I was never impressed with the B580. We've done some gaming live streams with it. Unfortunately, you can't use it for encoding and rendering games on one PC at the same time because for some weird reason the shaders are used for there's some kind of weird power management problem with B850. If you guys want to see what I'm talking about, go look up the live streams on this channel where we live streamed using a B580 for Assassin's Creed Shadows last year. And I also did another one more recently than that where we looked at a bunch of different games with the B580 and it was pretty terrible. And that's the reason why I decided not to spend money on a Pro B60 because doubling the VRAM wasn't going to improve the performance at all. So I kind of gave up on that. But anyway, the rumored B70, this will be like an OEM thing. And I don't think you'll be able to buy this. I could be wrong. It could show up in very low quantities from Newegg or somewhere. But this is that interesting dual GPU thing that Intel has. The Pro B70 with 32 gigabytes of VRAM. So this is really only good for AI people. Because if you were to get one of these and fire it up to play a game, only this GPU would be used for the game. You would only use half of the card. It would use one die, and it would use 16 gigs of VRAM. The rest of the GPU would be a complete waste of money, and it wouldn't even work. It wouldn't even run. It would just be completely unused silicon. So you don't want this for gaming. You want this if you're doing AI. 295X2. Yeah, it's like a 295X2. Yes. That's a good comparison. That's kind of what that is actually what it is. It's that type of GPU. It's a what do they call it? It's like a permanently cross-fired GPU. All right, so in terms of the GPUs for this year, this is one of them, and this is the other one. And that's basically 2026 in a nutshell. There'll be nothing else. There'll be nothing else all year. The Pro B70 and AMD's rumored flagship successor to the 700 XTX. And that's it. Take it or leave it, that's all you get. So the rest of the GPUs are all next year, including all of the NVIDIA stuff. The NVIDIA Rubin, RTX 6090, all that stuff, that's going to be May, June of next year. That's still more than a year away. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, here's the article from last month about the Intel GPU. Intel Arc Pro B70 and B65 Battlemage GPUs up to 32xe2 and 32 gigabyte GDDR6. You can see it right there. Target launch is Q1 of this year for both of them. And the use case is workstation graphics and AI. So like I said, this is not for gamers. If you buy one of these for gaming, you will be utterly disappointed. Trust me, I have a bunch of Intel GPUs, and there's a reason why we don't use them for gaming. But if you want to do like AI stuff, yeah, I mean, I guess I wouldn't know where to start with AI other than using Vulkan for everything, which is totally fine because Vulkan works great for AI on pretty much any GPU brand. It doesn't matter what brand of GPU it is. So that's that. So now let's talk about, we're going to talk about a motherboard on this stream, but let's talk about the biggest game to launch this month, where the only other game, there were two other really big games that launched this month. One of them was Neo 3, which we already covered. That was my personal biggest game of February, and currently that is my game of the year 2026. So we've already covered that extensively on this channel. If you tuned in to the live streams over the past couple of weekends, you would have seen that. And then Dragon Quest VII Reimagined was another big one. I didn't play that game because it released the exact same day as Neo 3. But now Resident Evil Requiem, a game that probably has a lot more visibility among the gaming audience, the gaming community, even outside the gaming community, because the Resident Evil name is well recognized. I assume that's the case, more so than Neo. Meaning the average person you meet on the street, there is probably a 10 times more likelihood that if you ask them about Resident Evil, if you ask them if they know what Resident Evil is, you're far more likely to find a random person on the street that knows what Resident Evil is versus trying to find a random person on the street that knows what Neo 3 is. So that's all my point has been proven with that statement. But anyway, let's take a look at this game. This game seems to be really, really good. The reviews are very positive. It's getting very, very high reviews. So let's take a look at the... we'll just go skip to the performance here. So let's go just skip past everything except 4K, because 4K is really the only one that matters. So here we go. At 4K, maximum settings, we can see that the RTX 5090 does 148 frames per second at 4K resolution. So this shows that the RE engine, as it has proven, as Capcom has proven time and time again, has very good visual quality while also providing very good performance when the game is built from the ground up to utilize the engine to its full potential. This is the type of game, a corridor-based closed environment game with a specific map layout with multi-tiered levels. This is where the RE engine really shines. It is best at these types of games. For the past 2 years now, Resident Evil has struggled and gotten quite a negative perception in the public's eye for these big open world games. 2 years ago, there was a game called Dragon's Dogma 2. That game was very hard to run because the RE engine struggles with scalability when you scale the game out into a very wide map in a very large open world environment, and that is exactly what Dragon's Dogma 2 is. The game was very hard to run. You had to have a very, very powerful CPU, and you had to have very fast DDR5 memory. If you were on DDR4, or if you were on an old CPU, or if you didn't have access to X3D V-Cache on a Ryzen CPU, you were probably having a very hard time running Dragon's Dogma 2, a game that launched nearly 2 years ago. Then, last year, Capcom launched their greatest game to release in the last 5 years, although I guess some Resident Evil 4 fans will probably disagree with me. Monster Hunter Wilds, a game that I probably have 500 something hours in, and that game clocked in, out of all the games that I played last year, Monster Hunter Wilds had over 60% of my gaming, my annual hours spent on gaming. Monster Hunter Wilds claimed over 60% of all hours I dedicated to gaming in 2025. So that game is no joke. And that game was even harder to run than Dragon's Dogma 2 because it is a multiplayer game, whereas Dragon's Dogma 2 was a single player game with asynchronous multiplayer elements. So that's the difference. Now, Monster Hunter can be played single player, but I think to truly enjoy the full spectrum that game offers, multiplayer is where it's at. Playing with friends, helping randoms out. I mean, it's just a great game all around. But Monster Hunter Wilds, that game was so hard to run that Capcom basically dictated that you turn on frame gen, and they said that if you weren't running frame gen, you're playing the game wrong. Like, you're literally doing it wrong. That was their answer in multiple interviews. They didn't really say that out loud to Western media. They did say that to a lot of like Japanese and Asian reviews and interviews. But I guess when it came to dealing with the West, Capcom didn't outright say. I mean, they did recommend it. In fact, if you installed the benchmark, and even when you first installed the game, they literally turned on frame gen for default settings. And if you tried to turn it off, they would there would be a prompt. They'd be like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And if you try to say yes, and it's like, "We recommend that you run with this setting enabled." And if you still say, "No, I want to turn it off," then they let you turn it off. But it was something that they definitely didn't want you to do. They definitely wanted you to play the game with frame gen. So, because the game was so hard to run, because RE Engine has severe scaling problems with open world games. So it's funny how they utilize frame gen as this is probably one of the best examples I've seen where a game company comes along, takes a technology, in this case frame gen, and utilizes it. They utilize it in such an integral way where the expectation from the developers is that you need to turn on frame gen, and if you aren't using frame gen, you're either playing the game in a not recommended manner, or you're playing the game on unsupported hardware because the hardware is too old to support frame gen. So that was kind of the stance that they took early on. Obviously, that stance kind of backfired, and they got a lot of negative feedback from the gaming community on that. And then they kind of like changed, and they're like, okay, well, we'll work on optimizing it. And then all throughout last year, they rolled out a couple of onesie twosie updates that, for the most part, didn't really do anything to improve performance. I mean, the way they addressed it was they added more settings to lower plant density or foliage density, lower object density, lower the NPC density that's rendered on screen at any given time. Basically, they put things in the settings to lower the load on the CPU because they knew that it was such a CPU-bound game. All right, but switching back to Resident Evil Requiem, now here we have a linear-based game, which is not an open-world game, and now you have the performance numbers that truly line up with what the RE Engine is designed to do. So these are native frame rates. This is with no frame gen. This is the performance, max settings, max rendered performance, or pure rasterization performance, I should say. And you can see even at 4K, there are a lot of GPUs that can play this game. It can go all the way down to the RTX 5070, although 61 FPS average is not what I would consider the best type of average. It is still a playable average versus everything else in this list. So even at 4K, These are pretty good results. A 9070 XT, a GPU, a mid-range GPU that is not designed for 4K gaming, can play this game at native 4K at 85 frames per second. Same thing with the 5070 Ti. The 5070 Ti at 82 frames per second at 4K max resolution. What I want to see is the VRAM usage. So VRAM usage, we can see here at maximum settings, 4K resolution is consuming about 11.5 gigabytes of VRAM. So that means that any 16 gigabyte graphics card can handle this game at 4K without running into VRAM problems, which is actually really good. Now, ray tracing, completely different story. You turn on ray tracing, and all of a sudden, the VRAM demands go way up. Now, at 4K, I find it interesting that they only looked at VRAM with ray tracing turned on at 4K resolution. They didn't bother to look at the lower end resolutions. So 4K max with ray tracing, it jumps up to about 15 gigabytes of VRAM. And apparently turning on multi-frame gen or frame gen increases the amount of VRAM used as well, to the point where when you use path tracing, the game exceeds 16 gigabytes using 17.3 gigabytes of VRAM, which is why I tell people, if you want a game at 4K, you need at least a 20 gigabyte or 24 gigabyte. There's only like one 20 gigabyte GPU, that's the 700 XT, which I don't really consider that a 4K GPU, especially in 2026. But ideally you would want a 24 gigabyte GPU or more. So ideally 32 gigabytes, but 24 gigabytes would get the job done if you want to play games at 4K native resolution without worrying about the VRAM limitations. So here we have FPS analysis. I like that they include this. This is quite interesting to look at. So here you can see at the bottom we have all the GPUs. On the left, they have the Intel A770 with 16 gigabytes and the Arc B580, 12 gigabytes. And then on the right-hand side, they have the 9070 and the 9070 XT. And you can see this is in line with what I expect, because RE Engine along with Decima Engine are probably my two favorite game engines of all time. And in the case of RE Engine has always done really, really good on Radeon hardware. I don't know why, because most of these third-party engines, I would say, are either neutral or they just favor NVIDIA, or if they release a game at launch, it tends to run better on NVIDIA GPUs. But RE Engine is like the complete opposite. Like, it actually prefers AMD GPUs, and you can see that in these results here. So here we have relative GPU performance when normalized against 25 game average from Tech PowerUp's own results. And you can see at 0%, so it shows here that specifically RDNA 4 GPUs are performing significantly better against the 25 game average that they actually would be compared against. RDNA 3 also does better as well, but RDNA 3 is more in line with the RTX 50 series results. And then Intel just underperforms from what I've seen. Intel underperforms. A lot of these Japanese developed engines, like RE Engine is a Japanese engine. Intel is just completely missing in action. Like, I've seen this time and time again. We looked at the B580 with Dragon's Dogma 2. In fact, we looked at A770 with Dragon's Dogma 2, and it was horrendously bad. It was kind of hilarious, but it was actually quite bad and devastating to Intel's image in the eyes of gamers, just looking at how bad the Dragon's Dogma 2 performance was 2 years ago. And we tested it probably 6 or 7 months ago now, and it was a little bit better, but it was really not better. So very, very disappointing stuff. But you can see that Tech Power-Up's results, I would say this lines up with what I personally have observed, just testing various games with my own hardware as well. So that's really interesting. Let's take a look at the ray tracing performance. So we're going to skip immediately to 4K. So 4K, here we have the ray tracing 4K maxed out. This is full RT high, 4K, native resolution. And you can see here, there is only one graphics card that can handle ray tracing 4K native resolution, and that is the RTX 5090, and it is doing 78.5 frames per second. No other GPU can handle Resident Evil Requiem at 4K with max RT. So the 4090 gets kind of close at 55 frames per second, but everything else is below 50. And the RDNA 4 and the RTX 5070 Ti, these two GPUs are basically the exact same GPU. You can see they're in the same ballpark, 38 and 40. So there's like a 2 to 3 FPS difference there. Doesn't really change anything in terms of the experience. And then you go further down the stack here, the once mighty 3090 Ti is struggling. Once the 3090 Ti and the 3090 before, which they don't even have the 3090 anymore, but the 3090 Ti was NVIDIA's 8K gaming GPU. You remember them saying the BF, the big ferocious GPU, the once mighty 3090 Ti is only capable of doing 34 frames per second at 450 watts of electricity. So that is, it's quite an old GPU at this point, but you know how the mighty have fallen. And then, yeah, man, this is why we need next generation hardware. And I cannot stress this enough. This is why I consider rasterization is not there yet. We have not solved the problem of rasterization, because mainstream still can't game at 4K with ray tracing. And this is the reason why ray tracing is still kind of a gimmick in the average gamer's eyes, because when you show them these type of results, it kind of disincentivizes them from using ray tracing. Now, we should look at some of the lower resolutions. So let's look at 1440p. At 1440p, the 4090 is capable of doing 102 FPS. So oversizing, for those who oversized and they bought like a 4090 to pair up with a 1440p monitor, I mean, I guess they're getting decent mileage out of that 4090 because it's able to handle ray tracing at the more, like, you know, lower end 1440p resolution. But that's not the sort of resolution that reviewers and tech enthusiasts really pay attention to these days. You go look at all the people who live stream these type of games, or games like Neo 3 or Monster Hunter Wilds, and they're all gaming and live streaming at 4K. Well, they're not live streaming at 4K, but they're playing the game at 4K. So 4K is kind of where it's at. I know all the reviewers who reviewed Resident Evil Requiem, who got a copy to review, you know, all the mainstream media doing the reviews, they did the reviews at 4K. So these are the most relevant results when people like IGN and GameSpot and ACG and all those guys, when they look at the results, they're looking at these numbers to see feasibility. To see if we've reached the pinnacle of technology, and clearly we have not. All right, now let's look at path tracing. Wait, this is path tracing? Yeah. So path tracing, they did a condensed version of it here for some reason. So path tracing, you can see at 4K, wait, what is this path tracing? Oh, because it does something specific. Okay. So in order to do this, turning on path tracing automatically engages DLSS with performance profile. Okay, so that kind of screws everything up because what that means is that you cannot disable it, but you may select DLAA. Okay, what that means is that the 4K result for the path tracing is really 1080p numbers. It's 1080p upscaled via DLSS to 4K. So a 5090 at 1080p, the 5090 is doing 125 frames per second with path tracing turned on at 1080p. These are 1080p internal resolution. And then for the 5080, the 5080 1080p path tracing number is 59 frames per second. The 5070 Ti, 54 frames per second at 10. Oh, FrameGen is on? Wait, really? Are you sure? It doesn't say that. It doesn't say FrameGen's turned on. I don't see FrameGen mentioned. And they don't say it here either. So I'm assuming these are the numbers without FrameGen. So the 5070 1080p rendered path trace number is 22 frames per second. It does say FrameGen? Where? Oh, right here. I see. In the description. Okay, on the actual chart. Okay, I see it. Yeah, that's, okay. So that means the 5090 is doing about 60 FPS. 60 FPS at 1080p native, or 1080p internal resolution. The 5080 is doing about 30 frames per second. 1080p. 5070 Ti. This is why the 5080 is a terrible value. It's like they're basically the same numbers. All right, and then the 5070 is doing 10 frames per second, 11 frames per second at 1080p path trace. And what the heck? The 5060 Ti is doing better? Because of the VRAM. The 5060 Ti beats the 5070 because of the VRAM. 16 gigs of VRAM on the 5060 Ti makes it faster than the 12 gigabytes on the 5070. Wow. Okay, but see, this is the reason why the average gamers don't take these things seriously. Like, I can't think of anybody that I know outside of people that watch this channel and pay attention to what we talk about on this channel. But I'm just thinking, like, in the real world, out of all the gamers that I know, none of them care about ray tracing, and as a result, they don't even know what this is. Like, if I start talking about path tracing, they're gonna tell me, please change the subject or I'm not gonna pay attention to you anymore. Like, that's the type of people. So, and these type of people, they play a lot of different games. Like, some of them are gonna be playing Resident Evil Requiem. Some of them play, you know, League of Legends, Overwatch 2, these type of games. So they don't really care about this path tracing stuff, and it's all kind of like nonsense to them every time they see it. And it's like, oh, it's like a 5070's doing 22 FPS at like 1080p. Like, that's terrible. Like, why would I ever, like, this is the most useless thing in the world, you know? So that's kind of the sentiment that I see, that I observe out in the wild, in the real world, when it comes to the average gamer's perception of ray tracing and path tracing and these type of things. I always hear the argument, graphics don't make the game. Or it's not about the graphics. It's about the gameplay. It's about the game. You know, there's more to it than the graphics, which are all valid arguments. Those are valid arguments. So it's not like I'm saying these people are completely invalid, but I think oftentimes the tech enthusiasts who are really interested in these numbers, they're overlooking the fact that the average gamer is not a tech enthusiast. They don't care what this does if it doesn't make the game playable at the end of the day. So this is more like futuristic. Like when I first tried to explain path tracing to somebody, man, the response that I got was so like, oh, wow, yeah, that sounds so cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Okay, yeah, dude, that sounds really good. Uh, okay, can we get back to the game now? Like, can we just like do something else? You know, like that was kind of the impression, you know, like the people don't care, man. Like people don't care. I'm sorry, but people don't care. I know the tech enthusiasts don't like hearing this, but this is the real world. This is the real world. You know, these people are more interested in like getting the next Genshin Impact character or the next skin in League of Legends than they are of turning path tracing on in Resident Evil Requiem. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, the sad reality is that's the average gamer. The average gamer is that type of individual, not the type of individual that cares about the image quality in a game at a high resolution. Why did the producers make the game? Because they don't expect you to use path tracing. That's a great question. That's a great question. It's because they don't even expect you to use these things. Even the developers don't care. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm underselling the work that they put in to deliver these fantastic capabilities in the RE engine. But they don't expect the average gamer to use path tracing. That's why they set the recommendations the way they are. And they also are trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator, because obviously they want to maximize the sales of the game. But the numbers that are most interesting to me are these numbers. Actually, let's look at the upscale. The upscale numbers actually are relevant to me. As someone who games at 4K all the time, because I have been using a 4K gaming monitor since 2022. At the time, I had the 6900 XT. And later in that year, I got the 3090 Ti right as it went on clearance. So as someone who has been gaming on 4K for almost 4 years, the 4K results are the 4K upscaling results, I should say, are the most relevant to me. So these are the ones that I actually care to see. And in particular, the 4K quality preset, because quality preset for 4K means 1440p upscaled to 4K. So if we look here, you can see, let's just look at, let's look at this one first. So the 5090 does 77 FPS at native. But then at 1440p upscaled to 4K, it does 111 frames per second. And this is with ray tracing turned on, set to high. I assume that's max, because RE Engine, your ray tracing maxes out on high. So this is maxed RT. This is not path tracing, but this is maxed RT. So at 1440p upscale, the 5090 does 111 frames per second. At 1080p upscaled to 4K, it does 142 frames per second. This is the type of game that FrameGen is probably not a terrible experience, because RE Engine actually handles FrameGen quite well compared to a lot of other game engines. So it's not that bad if you want to use FrameGen, but I also don't think it's really necessary to use FrameGen, because these results without FrameGen are already quite good. And then when we look at, these are kind of, why do they do it this way? Okay, see, Tech Power Up, I really wish that they would have shown the same resolution with the upscale for all of them, because this just kind of makes a lot of this data kind of useless. But I understand what they did. So what they did was they classified these GPUs the way I classify these GPUs. So they looked at it and like, oh, 5090 is a 4K GPU. So we're only going to test 4K results for the upscale. That is totally valid. I'm okay with them doing that. I really wish they would have done all these other ones at 4K though, because now it's kind of like, okay, but they're treating the 5070 Ti as 1440p GPU. And that's why they only tested the 1440p. Now 1440p upscale is kind of dumb in my opinion. So, and whatever, like, okay, quality, 96 frames per second, I guess. And then they're treating the 5060 Ti as a 1080p graphics card, which is kind of what that GPU is. And it doesn't do very well at the native. It says out of VRAM, 27 frames per... Oh, this is the 8GB card, that's why. So 8GB GPUs are not doing good at all. And then 9070 XT, again, they're treating it just like the 5070 Ti. They treat this, and rightfully so, as a 1440p GPU. So it has the same level of scaling. What this proves to me, looking at 5090 and then looking at 9070 XT, is that the resolution and the appropriately sized GPU for that resolution scales accordingly. I see linear scaling, and the results are very good, which indicates that this game is a well-optimized game, and it runs within expectations. It's meeting expectations as a hardware reviewer. There's nothing here that sticks out like, oh, this is poorly designed. So everything looks good. These 8GB GPUs are really struggling with the ray tracing because of the VRAM amounts. You can see they're struggling here. But when you lower the internal resolution, so I guess somebody can tell me which one of these results is the 720p upscale to 1080p. I assume it's balanced, but I could be wrong. But somewhere in here, it's 720p numbers with ray tracing turned on. "4K is for GPUs with a bus of 380 footage." Yeah. I mean, reviewers have the same understanding that I do, that certain GPUs are meant to be 4K GPUs, other GPUs are meant to be 1440p, and so on. I mean, the engineers who designed these GPUs have the exact same design principles, so it's totally fine. VRAM usage, we already looked at that. So overall, it says here, the conclusion from Tech Power Up, our friend Wizard over at Tech Power Up, he says that Requiem marks the 9th mainline. Okay, what's cool about Requiem, just now changing subject a little bit from the performance numbers, this is the first Resident Evil game that is not a remake of an old Resident Evil game in a long time. The last Resident Evil game that was not a remake was Resident Evil Village from 2021. That was like 5 years ago. So there hasn't been a new mainline Resident Evil game in 5 years. Which means, man, it's about time to see another Devil May Cry, Capcom. Like, where's that next Devil May Cry? The last Devil May Cry, DMC 5, was 2019. 2019, the year Resident Evil 2 Remake came out. So it's about time we see a Devil May Cry, man. I'm wanting to see a Devil May Cry. I've been playing a lot of action games in the last 2 years, but Devil May Cry, it's about time. We had Ninja Gaiden 4 last year, and Ninja Gaiden 2 Black on UE5. So we really need a Devil May Cry 6. So hopefully they announce one for next year or something, because, well, let's think about this. Capcom is one of the most successful game publishers in the industry. They are very good. They are one of the few large publishers that... Let's delete all this stuff. We don't need any of this anymore. We don't need any of that. We don't need any of this. Get rid of all of this. We can leave that there. All right, Capcom. Let's use a different color. Capcom 2019. Resident Evil 2 Remake. And DMC 5. Devil May Cry 5. That's how old that was. 2020. Does anybody remember? What was the 2020 game? I think it was Resident Evil 3 Remake. Then in 2021, Resident Evil Village. So that's basically 8. 2022. Well, what was 2022? Nothing? Someone's going to have to help me out on that. I'm drawing a blank. 2023. Resident Evil 4 Remake. Resident and Street Fighter 6. 2024. Dragon's Dogma 2. 2025. You guys should know, for those of you who follow my channel, you should know what was the big game from them last year. Everybody who watched this channel knows. It begins with an M. It was 60% of my entire annual gaming hours. Monster Hunter Wilds. 2026. Now we're in this year. Resident... Wait, why is there two? Resident Evil Requiem. Pragmata. And Monster Hunter Stories 3 and Oni Musha. This is going to be a big year for Capcom. There's got to be something that was in 2022. Let me see. Capcom 2022. There had to have been something. Oh, the Rise expansion. Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Village got an expansion. Village Winter's expansion. Dude, Resident Evil 7 is 2017, bruh. You're way off. Resident Evil 7 was 2017. Bruh, that game is like old. Capcom 2018. What was the 2018 games? Oh, was it? Oh, duh, man. I feel so dumb. How did I blank on that, man? Monster Hunter World. One of the best games ever made in the 8th generation of consoles. Iceborne was 2020. I already listed 8. 8 was 2021. There's no way 8 came before 7. This was the first RE Engine game. First RE Engine game was Resident Evil 7. So the RE Engine is responsible for a lot of stuff. Man, this year though is a big year. Big year. Next year, 2027, Monster Hunter Wilds expansion. This is going to be like the equivalent to Iceborne. That's going to be next year. That's early next year. So next year is going to be another Monster Hunter Wilds year. Because this year is not so much Monster Hunter Wilds. Next year's a big Monster Hunter Wilds year. Okay, and then I think that's it. I think I covered it. But this is a successful publisher. This company doesn't have a lot of mistakes. Like, every single one of these games on this list. Okay, now obviously we can't comment on games that are not released, so these don't really count right now. But every single one of these games has done exceptionally well. They have delivered on the promise to the gamers that play these games, and they're just fantastic. The Monster Hunter World, this was not RE Engine though. This was MT Framework, but this was RE Engine. But yeah, this Monster Hunter World went down in history as like one of the best games ever made in terms of the franchise, and it was the cash cow for Capcom, not counting mobile games, but in high fidelity, like AAA games. Monster Hunter World sold a ton, and it was super, super good. But yeah, they have like a ton of really good games. Capcom went from being one of the publishers that I barely paid attention to the point where they're probably one of my top 3 favorite publishers in the industry. The Capcom Cup champion. Yeah, I know, man. Like, the competitive stuff, like the Monster Hunter challenge events and things like that. Yeah, Street Fighter, Evo. Yeah, man, they got lots of representation. Capcom is good. Capcom's good. They're one of my favorites. You can see the Resident Evil franchise, the Monster Hunter franchise, the Devil May Cry franchise, the Street Fighter franchise, and then even older franchises that we haven't seen in a long time. Dragon's Dogma, Onimusha. When was the last time you played an Onimusha game? There's probably a bunch of people watching the stream right now that don't even know what Onimusha is. So they're bringing back an old franchise. Maybe that's why there's no Devil May Cry 6. Because they put all of it into Onimusha. And they're doing their random experimental projects. Like Pragmata. Pragmata is kind of like a experimental game that they had enough budget. Let's put it into this special one type of game that you don't really see very often. It's kind of like a Nier or a Dead Space or, you know, like some kind of rare game that you don't really see. You probably see these type of like an Expedition 33 type game that just randomly shows up once every 10 years, like the original Dragon's Dogma. Pragmata is going to be that type of game. It's like that experimental game where somebody convinced the higher-ups that they have a vision of making a game, and this is the idea, and it's like, okay, well, how realistic is the plan? What's the business plan? They did all that, and they signed off on it, and that's Pragmata. That's how it works. Like Shark Tank. So, hopefully it's successful. I mean, we will be playing Pragmata. I think that game is next. No, that's April. That's April. That's like the only game I have listed for April. So we will be taking a look at that. I'm really looking forward to Onimusha. Onimusha is one of the... There's no release date yet, but it is meant to launch this year, supposedly. But I wouldn't be surprised if Onimusha slips to next year, just because they're already putting out 3 massive games this year. So Resident Evil Requiem, Pragmata, and Monster Hunter Stories 3. And the crazy thing is, Stories 3 and Requiem are Q1. Pragmata is early Q2. So I would assume Onimusha is going to be like July at the earliest, or it'll be sometime in the second half of the year. Okay. So yeah, we will be taking a look at Resident Evil Requiem this weekend. So if you guys are interested in tuning in, just hanging out, we can discuss tech stuff. Now, I will say Resident Evil is the type of game that is probably going to demand a lot of my attention. I got to kind of pay attention to fight off the zombies or run from the monster or whatever. You know, that it's that type of game. It's kind of like when I streamed Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill F, for those of you who tuned into those live streams. And it looks like let me see here. So this weekend, we'll be streaming Resident Evil Requiem. Next weekend, I don't know what I'm going to be streaming. Actually, I think I know what I'll be streaming next weekend. I don't think I'm going to reveal it. I think I might keep it a secret, so it'll be a surprise. But yeah, we'll be streaming Resident Evil Requiem tomorrow. And because the game I think is out in a couple of hours or so. It might even be out now. I don't know, depending on where you are in the world. But either way, I'll be streaming it tomorrow. Next weekend will be kind of a mystery. And then the weekend of the 7th of March. Well, actually, no. The weekend of the 14th of March, we have Crimson Butterfly or Monster Hunter Stories 3. Now, I have to prioritize one over the other, and I have selected Crimson Butterfly. And then immediately after that, we have Crimson Desert. So we've got the Crimson games coming up. It's crazy. So we've got, let's do the lineup here. For those that are going to tune in, we have February 27, 28. This will be Requiem. Then we have March 6th and 7th. We have a mystery. Then we have the 13th. We have Friday the 13th. And, oh, that's so perfect. Okay, Friday the 13th. It's crazy. We had a Friday the 13th in February. And we have a Friday the 13th in March. So Friday the 13th is going to be Crimson Butterfly Remake. That is so perfect that that's on a Friday the 13th. Because this game, I don't know, Resident Evil Requiem might be a scary game. It might be an unsettling game, at least certain parts of it. This game, the whole game is scary. So it's like, if you want to build up tolerance for scary games, tune into Requiem so that you'll be able to handle increased blood pressure on Crimson Butterfly Remake, because this game is tense, dude. Like, oh man, this game is tense. Although I do think that the upgraded graphics make it seem less scary than the original. But anyway, that's going to be the Friday the 13th. And then the following one would be the 21st or the 20th? 20th, 21st. We have Crimson Desert. Crimson Desert. So this is the upcoming lineup for the next 4 weekends. This is what to expect if you want to tune in and see gameplay of these games. I expect Requiem to be, well, I don't know. Crimson Desert is an open world game. It could be hard to run, but I don't think it'll be super hard to run because it is not an MMO, but it is based off of a game engine that was designed to be an MMO. And MMOs typically are optimized for open world. And if you take away the multiplayer component, it should run pretty good. What's marathon? What's marathon? What's marathon? Marathon? What is that? What game is that? I've never heard of that. Marathon is an upcoming first-person shooter video game developed by Bungie. Well, the fact that I didn't know what it was kind of tells you that it's not the mystery game. I didn't even know what it was. So it's like, I don't know if it's DOA if I didn't even know about it. Does that mean it's DOA if GTR doesn't know about it? So, yeah, it's definitely not Marathon, I can say that right now. Because that's the first I've ever heard of that game. I didn't even know what that was. Okay. So, I think we'll leave it at the next 4 weekends. I don't think we need to go further out. Monster Hunter, people are probably like, what about Monster Hunter Stories 3? Monster Hunter Stories 3, unfortunately, that game is the one that got pushed to April. So, I know that game launches in March. I just don't have time to play it in March. I've prioritized these 2 games for March. Typically, I try to cover 2 games in 1 month for scheduling, so I'm not overwhelmed. So this month we had Neo 3. It worked out really good this month, to be honest, because the games were adequately spaced apart. So this month we had, I know Neo... Yeah, we had Neo 3, and then Resident Evil Requiem. And then the next game is Fatal Frame, and then Crimson Desert. So unfortunately, Monster Hunter Stories 3, it's wedged between those 2 games, and I'm more hyped for those 2 games. Even though Monster Hunter Stories 3 might surprise me, in fact, I'm expecting to be pleasantly surprised by Monster Hunter Stories 3, so I'm going into that without any expectations. So it'll probably be on my short list of games that I really enjoyed playing this year. So far, out of all the games that I've played this year, Neo 3 is my favorite game. So I have played 3 games so far. Yes, only 3 games. Actually, no, 4 games. I completely forgot about the live service game. So we played Trails Beyond the Horizon. This was back in January. And then Ark Knights Enfield, which was the live service gacha game. And then Code Vein 2, which out of those 3 games, Code Vein 2 was by far the most disappointing game out of the games that I played so far. And then Neo 3, because I was so disappointed at Code Vein 2 that, I don't know, I felt so bad about Code Vein 2 that I was thinking, man, this is one of those games that I was so hyped for, and it just doesn't feel right. Like it's okay, it's still kind of slow, it's still kind of clunky. And then Neo 3 came out, and I completely forgot about Code Vein 2. So where Code Vein 2 was the biggest disappointment for me, Neo 3 met every single expectation that I had for that game, and it went above and beyond, and it's currently my game of the year. So we'll see if these upcoming games can dethrone Neo 3, but currently my personal game of the year is Neo 3. And I don't expect Resident Evil Requiem to dethrone that game. But one of these other ones coming up in March might actually do so. There are a couple of really good ones in March. There are 3 really good games coming out in March. We are going to cover 2 of them, and the third one will be pushed to April. And the one in April will probably coincide with Pragmata, which means that April, looking a little further down the year here, if you tune into the weekend gaming streams, April is basically going to be a Capcom month because it's going to be Pragmata and Monster Hunter Stories 3 and probably a rerun of the spring festival for Monster Hunter Wilds. If I decide to do that, I might, because Monster Hunter Wilds is still a really big deal, but it'll basically be all Capcom games in April. It's all Capcom. Oh, Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, though. That's another one that I had to overlook because I just didn't have time. Yeah, if I have time, I'll circle back on Dragon Quest VII because that's pretty good from what I've seen. Romeo is a Dead Man. When is Romeo is a Dead Man coming? Is that already out? I think it's already out. Romeo... Didn't that game come out like... Yeah, the game was like February 11th. I completely forgot about it. Romeo is a Dead Man. Yeah. That game. Yeah, I was going to cover that one. That one was on my list. It just, there wasn't enough time. Neo 3 just basically took all the time. So I blame Neo 3 for being so good that I completely forgot about Romeo is a Dead Man. The Suda51 games are really good games. Those are the type of games that, if it was a big publisher like Capcom, the Suda51 type games like Romeo is a Dead Man, Lollipop Chainsaw, Shadow of the Damned, you know, these type of games, No More Heroes, like anyone who's familiar with Suda51 Grasshopper Manufacture games, those type of games are like hidden gems of Japanese game design, and they're the type of games that if that guy was under a larger publisher like Capcom, his games would be treated like Pragmata. They'd be treated as like these random little pet projects that are experimental games, because they all seem very experimental. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I was going to cover that game. Killer is Dead was another one. That was like the most recent one that he did, besides Romeo is a Dead Man. But yeah, I was supposed to cover that. But it just, Neo 3, man. I blame Neo 3. Neo 3 just like steamrolled every other thing that was released like right after it. Because there was another one, Blaze Blue Entropy. I also have that one listed. I didn't cover that at all. I blame Neo 3 for that. And there was another one, like Tokyo Extreme Racer. I think that one's actually out today. But that one I blame Evil Requiem. So I'm aware of a bunch of games that come out. I just don't have time to cover them. So I have to prioritize the ones that I'm most interested in. And those are the ones that get coverage on the channel. Oh, okay. So let's talk about Microsoft and what's happening with Xbox, because that's something that I wanted to talk about. I mentioned it at the beginning of the stream, and now I want to like circle back on that. So let me see. Where is was there an article? Okay. So if you're someone who pays attention to the gaming industry, Xbox, the head of Xbox, the CEO of Xbox, Phil Spencer, retired early this week. And with his departure, what was her name? There was another person that I remember. She was the one that was heading up the partnership with Asus on the Xbox Ally X. Can somebody mention her name? I forgot her name. She also departed Xbox. She was next in line to succeed Phil if he left, and then he left, and then she left at the same time. So with their departure, there is a new leader in charge of Xbox, and that person is Asha Sharma, pictured here, from Xbox. She is committed to Xbox, starting with the console. This is interesting. This is very interesting, because if you guys remember, we talked about the strategy that Xbox was adopting. We talked about it a year ago. We've talked about it a couple of times, actually, on multiple episodes of Tech Thursdays that were more focused on the gaming side of the house. When we weren't talking about computer parts and motherboards, we were talking about the Xbox Everywhere. If you guys remember the Xbox Everywhere strategy, and cloud gaming and live service subscription-based gaming, this was a strategy that Phil Spencer had laid out for his team for a couple of years now, and they were executing on it little by little. They were slowly moving in that direction. The fact that we saw the sales of the Series X kind of trail off into the oblivion, and then we had a lack of first-party titles from Microsoft that showed a clear direction in how they were going about getting gamers to focus on the Xbox brand as a platform. it was kind of all over the place. It was like, okay, Xbox is everywhere. Xbox is on your phone. Xbox is on a tablet. Xbox is on your handheld, like the Ally X. It's on various handhelds. It's on your PC. It's on the Xbox console itself. Like, that was their strategy. It was like, Xbox is everywhere. But the problem is, to it failed to turn heads. Like, it didn't really gain a lot of momentum. It was I would say it was slow. It was a slow burn. It was like they were gaining traction, but it was very, very slow to the point where it was almost unnoticeable to the untrained eye. And then you had controversial things happen, like the price increase to Xbox Game Pass. If you guys remember the Game Pass price increase, and that made a lot of people annoyed. A lot of people started canceling the service after that. And then what really made it bad was the AI issue with market and the DRAM, and it's hard to get computer hardware because everything started getting expensive. And then there were the rumors how you will own nothing and you will be happy. You don't need to upgrade your computer anymore. What you have now is what you get. It's literally like everyone got hit by Chernobyl's nuclear explosion. Like, all your PCs got irradiated and now they can't grow anymore. So what you have is what you got. Once those cells die off, there's nothing replacing them. Once your 5090 connector melts out and they're not going to honor the warranty, that's it. No more next generation hardware. It's over. This is the pinnacle of gaming. It's the end. After that, go and get a GeForce Now subscription. Go and get an Xbox Game Pass and do cloud gaming from Microsoft Azure. That's the future of gaming. So that rumor started going around and everybody got all worked up about it, and people started canceling their GeForce Now and their Xbox Game Pass subscriptions and all this stuff, and it got really bad. So that was like something that happened more recently, though. I kind of feel like Phil being pushed out was sort of already happening because they weren't happy with the slow growth of the Xbox brand. It was just not gaining enough traction at the projected speed each quarter, or whatever the metrics were that they were looking at to gauge the success of Xbox. And then you had all the negative press talking about how no one's buying a Series X and Microsoft doesn't have anything to compete with the Steam Deck, at a first party level. Then they kind of scrambled, and then they got Asus to do the Xbox Ally X, and like, okay, we can check that off, but it didn't really get perceived that way because the Xbox Ally X was real expensive, and there was nothing to compete with the PS5 Pro, even though that's even more niche, that's even more enthusiasts on the console side of the house, so maybe that wasn't even really relevant, and Microsoft doesn't really compete with Sony anymore, so their main focus was making Xbox expand into other platforms and really compete directly with Steam and push the Windows ecosystem and try to capitalize on Microsoft's investment in Windows 11 and kind of tighten their grip on that platform, which is kind of the reason why you see Steam pushing Linux a lot whenever they can, even though they know that they're going to be limited to enthusiasts of the Steam platform. So it's really, really interesting how with Asha coming into this weird ecosystem that she's inheriting with Phil leaving now, she's going to have to figure out like how to navigate this huge, I don't want to say mess, but it's kind of a spider web of all these different interconnects. Like, my Xbox is now all over the place. In my mind, it's kind of overextended. And if they're not able to have the sort of momentum and mind share that they had in the 360 days, it's kind of hard to grow when you're all over the place and there's no coherent strategy. So that's kind of why, if you ask the average gamer their perception on these brands, they don't really have a very strong opinion that's favorable for Xbox. You ask them what they think of PlayStation or Steam or Nintendo. And those three platforms pretty much are identical in terms of scope, like perception, public perception. People see Nintendo as they're doing their own thing. They're an entertainment brand, kind of like Disney, and they're really good at executing their strategy in that area. So Nintendo's totally fine with the way things are. Sony is the one that stands the most to lose. I've talked about Sony's strategy in the past and how they need to really diversify. Xbox needed to do the same thing, and to Phil's credit, he was doing that. He was trying to expand Xbox into these different areas, into mobile, into cloud. Now, I know PlayStation has a different way of doing things, but they kind of had a similar ecosystem. I wouldn't say it was as robust as Xbox's ecosystem, in the sense that Sony didn't have backwards compatibility in the way that Microsoft did. PlayStation 5 can play PlayStation 4 games, but it can't play PS1, 2, and 3. What was Sony's answer to that? PlayStation Now. Just like GeForce Now. Just like cloud gaming. It's like you could, if you were I think if you're a PS... I think if you have one of the premier tiers of the PlayStation Network annual or monthly subscription, I think you get access to a lot of that stuff. So that's kind of their workaround, but there's a bunch of cracks starting to appear in that solution, in the sense that the PlayStation 3 Blade servers that they use to host those retro games in the cloud are really, really old now, so they're in desperate need of an alternative, like whether that's emulating the console, using the PlayStation 5, or if not the PlayStation 5, maybe the PlayStation 6. Basically, Sony needs to find a better way of handling their legacy game library, because that is the legacy of PlayStation. Needs to be played to the strength of it, not the weakness of it. But the strength of the game library is becoming a weakness or a burden for Sony to have to carry if they have to support this old infrastructure to host PS3 servers. Now, I think what they need to do, I think the answer, the writing is on the wall. Sony needs to do emulation of PS3. They need to figure out how to do that. And there was another big article about Sony earlier this week as well. And let me see if these guys have it. If not, we'll have to find it from WCCF Tech. But it was a Blue Point article. Sony is shutting down Blue Point. Oh, this was last week? Yeah, so Sony, the most mind-boggling thing, if the departure of Phil Spencer from Xbox wasn't surprising enough, in other news, Sony goes and shuts down Blue Point. And I'm thinking, really? Like, what? Like, because couldn't they... The first thing that comes to my mind when I read this was, couldn't they have... If Blue Point wasn't being leveraged to remake an old classic, couldn't they have used these guys' talent in another way? Like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's wishful thinking. But I was thinking, like, couldn't they have had these guys work on building emulator for PlayStation 3 games on PlayStation 6? Like, you really need to shut down the whole studio just because they're not making a game? Like, couldn't you have them work on something that's not a game, but it enables games? Like, I don't know. Maybe that's just me not fully understanding what Blue Point's role was after PlayStation Studios acquired them. But that was another weird thing. That was just kind of like, what? Like, okay. So, really weird stuff in the gaming industry in the last 2 weeks here. Really, really strange news. Sony's strategy is, if it's not floundering, the cracks will start showing up a year from now. And going back to Asha Sharma taking over Xbox, like I really hope that she has an innovative approach to this, because I really want to see Xbox back on track. Like, she mentioned the console. She said, starting with the console. Okay, what does that mean? Like, does that mean that you're reversing the strategy of the Xbox being a premium gaming platform? Because when they said premium previously, people were thinking, okay, well, the Xbox Ally X is already like really expensive, like $900 expensive. Like, basically, you're spending $1,000 because the storage and all that other stuff. So it's like, if it's $1,000 for a handheld, what's the actual big box console going to cost? Now, technically, it should be cheaper because it's not going to need a screen. It's not going to need, all those things that come with the handheld for durability. But if you claim you're going to deliver a premium experience, what does that mean? Does that mean that it's going to be a $1,000 console? Does it mean that it's going to be like a pro level console out the gate, starting with the next generation? I don't know what that means. I didn't know how to interpret that. Most industry analysts also didn't know how to interpret those statements coming out of Xbox's leadership. So with her taking over, now she goes and says, I'm committed to Xbox starting with the console. Okay, the key word that everybody is going to tunnel vision and zoom in on is the word console. The word console, because I don't know about you guys, but has anybody here recently bought an Xbox Series X? Or does anybody here? Okay, here's going to be the poll for the stream. Do you have an Xbox Series X? And notice I'm specifically saying Xbox Series X. I don't care if you have an older Xbox, and I also don't care if you have an Xbox Series S, because this is a tech enthusiast-based channel, so we don't focus on Series S, because that is not enthusiast class gaming experiences. That isn't even, and that's like, in my mind, that's below minimum. That's below mainstream in terms of the experience that the Series S provides. All right, so we got 11 people voting. We got like almost 60 people in here and only 11 people voted. It's a very simple yes or no question, guys. Do you have an Xbox Series X or not? This is really good industry feedback to Microsoft, by the way, these results, even though this is a relatively small sample size. Because this is actually querying, see, the results on this channel are showing, people like Asha Sharma, they're showing what the enthusiasts are valuing.
I have one, but I haven't touched it for 2 years plus.
That is a pretty common response that I have heard from other people I know that also have Xbox Series X and have had one either since launch or they've had them for like you said, 2 years. They haven't used it in 2 years. So I personally bought one at the start of this year, believe it or not. Best Buy had one on a special holiday clearance, not clearance because they still stocked them, but they had like a special, post-holiday season sale for like 48 hours. You could go into Best Buy and you could get a Series X for $500. Now, you guys know that the launch price of the Series X was $500, but they increased the price. So I forgot to mention this. Another thing under Phil's direction was not only did they raise the price of Game Pass, they also mind-bogglingly, or if that's even a word, they raised the price of the Series X by like $100 or like $100. They raised it twice. They went from $500 to $600, and then they went from $600 to $650. So when I saw that, this was like this was like the day after New Year's Day, I saw that Best Buy had a special deal for like 48 hours. It was like for the next 48 hours, you can get in-store only Xbox Series X for $499. When I saw that, I was like, this might be my only chance to get one of these Xbox consoles at the actual launch price, considering that the price has never gone down and it's only gone up. And then I kept weighing the pros and cons in my mind. I was like, $500 for a console that I'll barely use outside of retro gaming, like using it to play my Xbox original and Xbox 360 games. You know what I'm saying? Because that's the main reason why I wanted to buy one. And I was like, is that worth $500? Just to play retro games with software emulated upscaling capability? Like experiencing it on the actual console with my actual discs from way back when? And I was thinking, this might be my only chance to get it at an acceptable price, which was the launch price, $500, $499. So I decided I'm going to get it, man. I'm just going to get it. So I got it. We covered it. You guys remember back in January, the theme of gaming for me in January was all retro gaming. We did a lot of retro gaming back in January up until Arknight's Enfield came out. I think we briefly covered Trails Beyond the Horizon. And then we did a lot of retro gaming. I remember we did Xbox original, we did Xbox 360, we did PS2, we did PS3, we did I did not do GameCube. That was the one that I didn't do. So if we do another retro stream, we're probably gonna do GameCube. Yeah. But there was so much emphasis on retro gaming, and it was because I was so fed up with DRAM prices being through the roof. I can't buy an SSD, like a 4 terabyte SSD for the normal price that I'm used to paying anymore. So I was so disenfranchised by computer hardware prices that I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go buy an Xbox. I could see it, 48-hour sale, special flash sale from Best Buy, $499. I've been thinking of getting one, and I regret not getting one at launch. So I was like, this is like the golden opportunity, better get it. So I went and got one. So now I have all of the current generation consoles. That was the one console that I didn't have, and I was not going to pay $650 for a console that launched in 2020. Xbox Series X will be a rare collector's item, especially if you got the one with the sparkle, like Halo Infinite theme one, yeah. The only purpose of Xbox is backwards compatibility. Dude, that's why I bought one. You've owned Xbox One X and PS4 at the same time, though. Oh, Xbox One X. Xbox One X is pretty rare, isn't it? I don't really hear a lot about people who have those. I remember that thing. That thing came out in like 2017. And I remember one of my friends was so happy about it. And then that was the year that PUBG was early access. And then PUBG went to Xbox or Xbox One and Xbox One X. And I asked him, how does the Xbox One X handle PUBG? And he was like, it's bad. It's bad. But I remember PUBG was the most janky, unoptimized mess when it was in early access. There wasn't even proper like prone and getting on walls, man. Early days PUBG was the most janky battle royale I've ever played, but it was so fun in the early days of PUBG. N64, play Pokemon Stadium. I don't have an N64, so I do have I have all the 6th, 7th. Wait, no, I've got all the 7th. I have 6th, 7th, and 9th generations. I only have PS4, and I have the original Switch and the Wii U from the 8th generation. I don't have the Xbox One or the Xbox One X. I have Xbox Xbox 360, and now, as I just said earlier, Xbox Series X. So I've got 3 different Xbox generations. I'm missing the 8th generation. Yeah, I did a bunch of retro stuff, man. Like, one of the things that I did, I changed out my Blu-ray laser on my PS3 Fat because it was having trouble reading PS2 DVDs and actual DVDs. It could read Blu-rays. The only way I could get it to read DVDs and PlayStation 2 discs was I had to lay it horizontal. When I had my PS3 Fat vertical, it would not read PS2 or DVDs. It would read PS1, it would read CDs, and it would read Blu-rays, but it would not read DVDs. So I had to replace the laser in the Blu-ray drive. And after doing that, now it works perfectly again. Yeah. And there have been requests for retro streams again, which we'll probably do one maybe in May. I don't have a lot of games listed for the rest of this year, so there may be plenty of instances where I can do retro streams again. But anyway, I'm hoping, I'm willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. A lot of people are like, oh, she's coming from AI. What does she know? She's not even a gamer. At least Phil was a legit gamer. He had an actual, he had an Xbox tag, and he had a whole bunch of achievements unlocked, you know. So he was someone who I think the target audience looked up to, or they respected to an extent. She has her work cut out for her in terms of the strategy and getting people to believe that she's the right person for the job. So she says here, for me, the spirit of Return to Xbox is about returning to the spirit that the team was founded on. It's that spirit of surprise. It's the spirit of building something nobody else was willing to try. I've heard Renegade, Rebellion, and Fun used. That's what I was thinking about when I wrote that. Okay, so I guess someone asked her, like, why? What are the plans? She said the return of Xbox. That's why they're like, well, what does that mean? I think she has a lot of, I don't know how much freedom she has to reverse some of the things that were already set in motion in terms of Xbox Everywhere. I don't expect them to reverse the price of Xbox Game Pass. I could be surprised and proven wrong. I don't see them doing that, though. I really think what they need to do is they just need to go to China and get Chinese developers to make them some great games. That's probably sounds so outrageous, but I really think that's what they need to do. That's what they need to do. They just need to go to China and convince Tencent, or they don't even need Tencent, man. Just go and get the Chinese studios to make them some good games. Go and make a Genshin Impact. Like, it doesn't have to be okay. Make a Genshin Impact that doesn't have the gacha. And monetize it the way League of Legends does monetization, by selling character skins that you can just straight up buy. None of this nonsense probability and statistics rolling the dice of whether or not you're going to get the character you want. You know, none of that nonsense. Like, make something like that. I feel like Microsoft has enough investment power that they could do that. They're like the one publisher. Sony can do that too, by the way. But I think Microsoft has more capability in terms of doing that. Though they don't have to do Genshin Impact. I don't want to see Genshin Impact on Xbox. I want something newer than Genshin Impact. But it sounds ridiculous to hear myself say that that Sharma should go and send her like sales prospector team to go to China. It doesn't have to be China, man. Like, they could go to like the Eastern European studios, like the guys who did Lords of the Fallen back in 2023. They could go and get those guys to make a great game. They could go and get Sandfall Entertainment, the people who made Expedition 33. They could easily fund Sandfall's next big project. They could do that. They need to go and get like those type of studios. If it's gonna be Western developers, it needs to be those type of developers. Otherwise, they need to go to China, because China right now, the Chinese developers, they have the capabilities to revive the sort of industry that it's in currently. Where I think the Chinese developers are weak is there's way too much emphasis on live service, which is crazy now that I think about it, because Microsoft wanted Xbox to be a service-based offering, like subscription, Xbox Game Pass, cloud gaming. These strategies align with the majority of Chinese game development. So it would be like a perfect marriage. You know what I'm saying? Like, that would be great. But if she wants to take it a step further, because that's only if you care about getting the money, meeting the ROI. But if she cares about what she just said here, that the spirit of Xbox was founded on a spirit of surprise, the spirit of building something nobody else was willing to try. So I see this statement as, okay, rather than just trying to make the best live service or gacha game or whatever, cash cow style game, whatever that ends up being, make something like Black Myth Wukong. The type of game that when the developers made that game, they set out to make that game. They had a specific vision and a monetization, very basic system. You buy the game, you get the game. It's not going to be a live service game. It's a one-time thing. Those type of AAA experiences, which are becoming more and more rare, especially with AI entering game development now, with things like vibe coding and automated bug fixing using vibe coding, using AI. With that entering the industry, the quality, the speed at which games can be launched to market shortens, which means you'll see faster game releases, at least in theory. But the double-edged sword in that is that the quality of the game will probably be lower. It'll have less impact, less vision, less quality. It'll become quantity. The industry will become quantity over quality. And that's kind of the way that the gaming industry has been headed in the last 5 years, if we're being honest. You look at how many games were published on Steam in the last 2 years versus the last 5 years before that. The speed at which games are launching is decreasing. They're coming out faster, but it's a bunch of slop. You're having to wait longer for these truly high-end, high-quality games. Meanwhile, you're getting all these like low-quality mishmash games just kind of thrown in your face all the time, because you're waiting like what used to be 3 years, then it became 4 years. In some cases, it's now like 10 years plus. I'm looking at GTA 6. I'm looking at you, Rockstar. It's taking you more than a decade. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's taking so long now with some game releases that now you just settle for less. For the gamers. I'm speaking to the gamers. Now you have to settle for less. So anyway. So I think that she has a golden opportunity here. I think that really, ultimately, actions are going to speak louder than words. So what ends up happening with this change, I do feel like Phil was a good guy. I didn't really, I didn't think anything negative of him. I always thought he was pretty good in terms of He was a legit gamer. He actually played games. He understood the audience. I don't know if he fully understood the audience's perspective when it came to monetization and subscription services. I think there may have been a little bit of a disconnect there. But I don't know. Maybe she'll have a different approach. Maybe she'll rethink that part of it and take the feedback that has been tossed around and talked about in the media for several months now. It feels like a couple of years at this point, and maybe change some of that and reinvigorate the Xbox strategy, because I feel like Xbox has really been all over the place recently. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. Sony killing off Bluepoint is one that I don't understand, though. This I have nothing to say on. Like, I just don't understand. I don't understand what's going on there. There was some rumor that they were working on a God of War MMO or a God of War live service that got canceled. I really think they should have took the core team of Bluepoint and put them on a project for a PlayStation 3 emulator, or maybe a PS1, 2, and 3 emulator for PS6. If not PS5, because PS5 is really old now, PS6. Something along those lines. I think something to extend and show because PlayStation's strength is in its library. There's so many games over so many generations of gaming now, going as far back as the original PlayStation in the 90s. And to not embrace that legacy, Sony and PlayStation is leaving so much on the table. And the cloud hosting PlayStation Now, PS3 Blade servers is not the answer. They need to strongly consider a foundational emulator inside their next generation console that can accept the discs of these old games. Like, is it so hard to do that? Like, is it that hard to make a PS3 emulator? I mean, there already are PS3 emulators, I'm just saying, but to do it in hardware on a PlayStation 6, is that so much to ask from an architecture standpoint? Maybe Mark Cerny would be the right person to answer that question. But I don't know. I really think Sony needs to lean in on the legacy of PlayStation's game lineup. That is their biggest strength. And by ignoring that, letting that go to the wayside, that is hurting the PlayStation brand. And that is making them less and less relevant in the eyes of gamers and future generations of gamers. They could have remade so many. Well, it's because remakes are looked at as a double-edged sword. On the one end, everyone likes remakes, but not everyone likes remakes, because for every one person that gets hyped up about a remake of an old game, you have 2 or 3 other people looking at it like, what has gaming become? Is gaming literally just a bunch of remakes now? Like, does no one have any good ideas anymore? Like, what happened to all the creativity? Why is it just remakes? Why is it still Final Fantasy VII Remake? Demon's Souls Remake? All the Resident Evil remakes? What's with all the remakes? Fatal Frame remakes? Where are all the new games? Where are all the new IP? Where are all the new franchises? Like, see, that's the reason why remakes have a double-edged sword. There's a good thing about them because there's the nostalgia and there's the ability to re-experience the game on newer platforms with high-fidelity graphics and sound, aka Demon's Souls Remake, which is still one of the best-looking games that is exclusive on PlayStation 5. And this is a launch game from 2020 in the pandemic, and it still looks this good. So on one end, you have really good remakes. On the other hand, you have all these people that are like, man, what has gaming become? Like, is no one creative anymore? Like, everyone's just remaking like old games. Were those old games truly the pinnacle of gaming? Like, you can't manage to top Final Fantasy VII in the RPG world. They have to keep remaking one every 3 years. Like, you know, you have a lot of that. You have a lot of that noise in the background. And the big publishers like Sony pay attention to that. The God of War stuff, all these recent God of War games are all remakes. They're like reimagining of these old games. Literally, the entire Tomb Raider game lineup from the PS4 generation is all remakes.
I just read RE9 runs below 60 FPS on 5090 in 4K path tracing. Guess I will have to turn on DLSS quality and frame general.
Well, if you're going to use path tracing, but the problem is path tracing, you can't even turn off the DLSS. It automatically sets it to these preset things. So if you're looking at doing path tracing, you have to use DLSS. As far as my understanding from what Tech Power Up said in their review article, you can't use path tracing in RE9 without DLSS automatically being enabled. But appreciate the comment, because a lot of people are probably not aware of that you have to use DLSS. Like, it forces it on if you want to run the game with path tracing enabled. It doesn't do it if you're using ray tracing, but if you want to turn on full path tracing, it automatically turns on DLSS. Remakes are not the same. Yeah, they're not the same game. They're definitely not the same game. Some remakes they try to stay true to the original. Others take liberties in just like reimagining the game. I guess there is a distinction between a remake versus a remaster versus a reimagining of an old game. I would say a remake is the most generic term. It could be almost the exact same game, or it could be something different. Best example, Final Fantasy VII Remake. So let's look at this. Final Fantasy VII, the original. The original, what was it, 1997? Was that 1997? I think it was 1997. Oh, dude, wow. Power Rangers Turbo. What a year. Final Fantasy VII. And then we had Final Fantasy VII Remake in, what was that, 2020? Yeah, that was 2020. What? Okay, 2020. So that's like a long time. That's a long time. This is very different from this. In fact, if you were to play this and never having played this, you would have not even seen half of what the original game offered. And not only that, the battle system is different. It's turn-based, but it's very different. The exploration is different. This game uses a over-the-shoulder camera angle. This one uses fixed camera angles in a diorama-based, like 2D/3D background. Like, so very, very different games. Definitely very, very different games. Now let's talk about some other games. The original Demon's Souls, 2009. Then we have Demon's Souls Remake. Now, they didn't call it Remake. They just called it Demon's Souls. It was like literally just Demon's Souls 2020 PS5 launch title. So you had a 7th generation game and a remake of it in the 9th generation. So this literally skipped an entire generation of gaming. You went PS3 to PS5. Now, these two games, they actually play identical. identically. They have the exact same. If you watch the developer interview, Blue Point did the remake, and they tried to stay so true to the original game that they even say that the frame timing for all the animations, they did new animations, but the frame data for every attack, for every parry, for every repost, for every range attack, for every jump, all the frame timing was exactly the same as the 2009 original. The only difference was that the original Demon's Souls runs at 30 frames per second, whereas the remake runs at 60 or up to 60 frames per second. I think there's like a resolution quality mode or whatever, and that's 30, but it has a 60 frames per second mode. And the frame timings match up, regardless of whether you're in 30 or 60. Like your attack animations, everything are the same. So these two games are the same. Whereas the Final Fantasy VII and the remake are not the same game. They are very different. So this is the reason why I think remake, the word remake, is a very generic term. And it could mean the game could be very, very similar to the original, just with better graphics and better sound. Or it could be a complete reimagining of the original game, and the developer could take a lot of liberties with changing a lot of things. Like what Square Enix did with the remake, they redid the camera system. It's not fixed camera angles. They changed the way that you interact with enemies on the field. In the original game, it was random encounters. You can't see enemies. You wander around the map and bam, all of a sudden you're into battle. You're forced into battle. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, you see all the enemies on the map. So you can clearly avoid them if you don't want to deal with them. So, very, very different style. And of course, Final Fantasy VII, the original, on PS1, no voice acting. There was music, it had a great musical score, but there was no voice acting. You had to read all the text to understand what was going on. Whereas in the modern remake, it is fully voiced. So there are huge differences with when it comes to a remake. Well, yeah, but the thing is, sometimes they don't use the word remaster. This Demon's Souls 2020 is clearly referred to as a remake, but it is more like a remaster. But I wouldn't even say that. This is still a remake. When I hear the word remaster, I think of somebody taking a game that was meant to be. I'll give you a good example of a remaster. A remaster would be like Star Wars Episode 7. Or no, Star Wars Episode 5. The Empire Strikes Back. This film was remastered in the 1990s. The original movie was 1980, if I'm not mistaken. 1980. They remastered it in, I believe, the mid-90s. And they literally called it a remaster of the original movie. That's a remaster. An example of a remaster. Here's an example of a remaster. So, Nier 2010. There was Nier 2010. Nier Replicant. And then there was Nier Replicant version 1.2.224744871139. Then there was this one. This was in 2021. This is not a remake. This is a remaster. This is literally a copy-paste of this game, only now they render it in modern hardware so that it can do things like locked 60 FPS instead of variable 60 FPS on PS3 and 360. And they also add some other gameplay modes that are like bonus modes or whatever. This is an example of a remaster of a game where they did not do a lot of effort. The amount of effort to release Nier Replicant, this is a game that I always planned to cover, but this YouTube channel wasn't really what it is today back in 2021. So I never covered Replicant. But this is one of the hidden. This game is what I consider one of the hidden gems of the 7th generation, one of the lost great games of that era. This is basically the adult version of Kingdom Hearts, for those familiar with Kingdom Hearts and have never heard of this. So anyway, this is again PS3 and 360 era gaming. But it was so good, they remastered it in 2021, a few years ago, for modern platforms. But this is basically an example of a remaster, because you boot up these games side by side. In fact, I might cover this in a retro stream in the future. I think I covered it though. Yeah, we did. We did stream Nier 2010 on PS3 when we did the retro, or maybe it was 360. No, we did it. We covered this game. I know we covered it back in January briefly. We played like the first 15 minutes of it or so. But yeah, and that game holds up real well. In fact, if you were to boot this up on an Xbox Series X using backwards compatibility of the 360 original, side by side with the new remake, if it wasn't for the fact that in the international release of Nier 2010, the main character is the dad of the girl, whereas in Replicant, they took the Japanese protagonist, which is actually the older brother of the girl. If it wasn't for the fact that the protagonist is the brother as opposed to the father, if it was the same character, you would be hard-pressed to tell the difference side by side between the original upscaled on Xbox Series X versus the native remaster also on Xbox Series X. So that is an example of a remaster versus an actual remake. This is a true remake because the Blue Point, first of all, From Software made the original. Blue Point did the remake, and they redid the whole thing. Some of the stuff that they did, I don't agree with. Personally, when it comes to Demon's Souls, I prefer the original soundtrack of the original PS3 version. I think the new soundtrack in the remake is not as good, and I really wish that they would have included some way to play the remake with the original OST. If they released that as DLC, man, I would have bought that DLC so fast. Because the original OST is so good. It is so good. The same group that did the music of Demon's Souls 2009 is the same group that did the music of Bloodborne on the PS4. That is the reason why I've always said Demon's Souls, and I'm not talking about the remake, I'm talking about the original. Demon's Souls and Bloodborne are so good because the music, the OST of those two games are on a completely different level. The music of Demon's Souls and Bloodborne is so much better than the entire Dark Souls trilogy and Elden Ring combined. Because Sony was involved. Sony Pictures was involved with the music of Demon Souls and Bloodborne. And that music is so much better than From Software doing their own music, because From Software does a lot of like synthetic music that they make using software to emulate like different instruments. I mean, they'll use a small scale orchestra for the final recording, but there is no comparison, man. The music of Demon Souls 2009 and the music of Bloodborne is on a whole nother level in terms of music compared to the music of Dark Souls and Elden Ring. Because Dark Souls and Elden Ring, that music was From Software doing their thing. If you listen to Evergrace. The what? Legacy of King. What are we talking about? Oh, The Last of Us. The Last of Us remaster. That is a remaster. The Last of Us is another example of this. Yeah, Last of Us is a PS3 game. I think I've made it quite clear that PS3, 7th generation was peak. 7th gen was peak. 7th gen had all the greats. You had The Last of Us, you had Demon Souls, you had Dark Souls, you had Nier, you had... that was the generation where Call of Duty was at its peak as well, with COD 4 and Modern Warfare and all that stuff. That was all 7th generation era. Uncharted 2, Metal Gear Solid 4, Halo 3, Halo ODST. 7th gen, man. 7th gen was where it was at. Ninja Gaiden 2. Then you had the really, really good experimental games. The hidden gems like Nier. Demon Souls kind of falls in that category. Yeah, Demon Souls falls in that category. Catherine, that game was a hidden gem. Like, dude. Peak. 7th gen. That's where it's at. And that was actually the true console war. That was the true console war. That was literally the true console war. 360 versus PS3, man. That felt like a real console war. It's funny talking about this stuff years later. It's kind of like something from like Star Wars. It was like, oh, that was back in the Clone Wars. You know, oh, that was back in the console wars. You know, oh, Demon Souls 2009, that was in the console wars. Uncharted 2 and Halo 3, those were console wars era. All right, guys. Well, we managed to squeeze a whole nother hour out of the episode because I didn't have anything else to talk about. So we're going to go ahead and end the poll here. So it looks like about 1 out of 4 of the people watching the stream have an Xbox Series X. That means 3/4 of you, it's about 75, it says 76, I'm going to say 75% because I make it easy. 75% of you do not have an Xbox Series X. 25% of you, roughly 25%. I mean, I'll include myself, so it becomes 25%. Have an Xbox Series X. So that's not very good for Microsoft. But yeah. And with that, I think we're at the end of Tech Thursdays for this week. I'm trying to think, did I cover everything? Yeah, gaming industry, new GPU. Yeah, we talked about the GPUs for this year. We talked about CPUs. Well, we didn't talk about CPUs. We talked about CPUs last time. I think we'll talk about CPUs later in the year. I mean, right? We've already talked about them extensively on the last 2 episodes of Tech Thursdays. So we may talk about them again. Basically, if you're interested in upgrading your actual motherboard and your CPU this year, I mean, if you're on AM5, there's a chance that you might be able to just get a Zen 6 CPU, but it could be on a new socket. I think we don't actually know. I think there are some people that say that it's on AM5. There are others that say it's going to be a new socket. Personally, I think it needs to be a new socket. I'm more in the voting for I want it to be on a new socket. But if it's on AM5 and they can somehow deliver the features that they need to deliver for Zen 6, then that's good. I mean, it still needs to release with a new chipset, regardless of whether it's a new socket or not. So, from my point of view, I don't care if it's on a new socket or not. I just think that it needs to have the sort of feature set that it needs to be competitive with Intel. But then Intel's also launching their stuff later this year too. So anyway, that was the CPU discussion. We'll do more CPU discussion as the year goes by, because that's probably the only thing that's worth looking forward to this year, because memory's not going to get cheaper, GPUs aren't going to get cheaper, and there are really no new GPUs this year unless AMD launches their RDNA 5 stuff at the end of the year. There's really nothing. So that just leaves CPUs. But there could be some good ones, so be on the lookout for that as we get further into 2026. And with that, I think we've reached the end of this episode of Tech Thursdays. If you're new to the channel and you like these free-form discussions about PC hardware and gaming and technology as they kind of are mixed in the PC DIY enthusiast crowd, definitely get subscribed to the channel. We do this sort of content every Thursdays. We have these episodes. Tech Thursdays is the name, obviously. And then I also cover games on the weekend, usually on a Friday or Saturday. It depends. Sometimes it's both, but that's not a guarantee. So if you are interested in the gaming live streams, if that appeals to you at all, because I know not everybody who watches my content are into games, and that's totally fine. Some of them, most people here, I think we're 50-50 split, although I would probably say, no, I'll probably say about 70. I think about like 70% of my audience plays video games and builds custom computers. And I think the remaining 30% are not interested in gaming, which is totally fine. But if you're interested in the gaming stuff, definitely check out the weekend live streams. Hit the bell icon so you get notified when I go live if you want to swing by and see what we're covering. And this weekend it's going to be Resident Evil Requiem. And only Resident Evil Requiem. I know Monster Hunter is adding some stuff. We will circle back on Monster Hunter probably. I don't know if it'll be in March. I know Monster Hunter Stories 3, Fatal Frame, Crimson Desert is going to take up most of March in terms of the gaming hours that I have set aside for that. But we will circle back at some point with Monster Hunter. I do need to do the 10-star Zoshia and some of the other stuff that they have planned. So definitely stay tuned for that. I will cover it at some point. And with that, we've reached the end of Tech Thursdays. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. And I will see you guys tomorrow if you're wanting to check out Resident Evil Requiem with me on the live stream. And until then, take care, and I will see you guys then. Thanks.